Okay, UB fans, it's time once again for one of your favorite podcasts, the Bullseye Nation. It is the weekly podcast of your UB Bulls. And this week we're going to be talking about UB's most recent game, a disappointing 45-24 loss to the Ohio Bobcats. UB still has not won at Peen Stadium since 2009. Coming up, you're going to hear from Norm Rodriguez, plus we'll give you highlights, plays of the game, and so much more. And even despite this loss, I'm going to tell you why I think UB still is the favorite to win the MAC East, even after losing the tiebreaker to Ohio. So all that and so much more coming up straight ahead. And the UB Bulls podcast, Bullseye Nation, starts right now. Good evening, everybody, and welcome again to Bullseye Nation. I am John Karuba, and for UB, well, there's really no sugarcoating it. Very disappointing 45-24 loss to the Ohio Bobcats. This was really the game to decide first place in the MAC East, and unfortunately, UB, they fell behind. It's funny. I'll mention this with Norm later on in the postgame, but one thing about this game, what we have seen from the UB Bulls over their 5-game winning streak, they have not been afraid to jump ahead outside of the game against Toledo. But for the most part, they've been getting the early jump on opponents. They've taken the crowd out of it or gotten the crowd into it if they've been at home. And they've been disciplined in taking care of the football. Well, in this game, in all reality, we saw that formula and script get flipped the other way on your UB Bulls, as the Bulls found themselves down 17-0 after the first quarter, and really it was all downhill from there. You know, you give UB credit for battling back. At one point got it to as close as 31-24, but I think the big alarming question that Coach Mo is going to have to answer after this one, what happened to the defense? The defense had been dominant, lights out, over this 5-game winning streak. You saw what they did to DeQuan Finn last week in that big victory against Toledo. And today, Rourke was just tearing them apart, especially in that first half. He threw for a couple of touchdowns, already had over 200 yards at the halftime mark. I mean, that is just not going to get it done on the defensive side of the football. And it just seemed like no matter what UB tried to do on defense, whether it was blitzing, dropping back, it seemed like Ohio and their quarterback Rourke had the answer for everything. So you got to give them a lot of credit. But I think for UB, this is a little bit of a wake-up call. You know, they had been 4-0 through the MAC, got a ton of big wins against not only Toledo, but also Miami of Ohio, and a couple other big victories as well. Now they're showing that they're not quite as invincible as they may have seemed, as now Ohio and UB are 4-1 in the conference. However, and this is going to be my hot take, and one of the big things is that, you know, a lot of people now, it's easy to jump off the bandwagon and say, well, just focus on becoming bowl eligible, which UB should be able to do easily here over the final 3 weeks of the regular season. But a lot of them are saying jump off the bandwagon. They're not going to win the MAC East anymore. You can kiss that goodbye. I don't believe that. In fact, I still think UB has a better shot to win this division than Ohio does, even with the Bobcats holding the tiebreaker, the head-to-head. Because if you look at Ohio's next 3 games to close out the season, they are a whole lot of a heck tougher than the UB Bulls schedule. I mean, for Ohio, you have to play not only Miami, Ohio, that's actually starting to turn their season around on the road next week. They also have to go to Ball State. And one thing that we saw in that Toledo game for UB, the MAC West has a lot of tough teams that will always give you scrappy competing outings every single time out. And Ohio's going to have to deal with that in a couple of weeks on the road at Ball State, who's also fighting to save their season. And then you've got a rivalry game to close it out at home against Bowling Green. And so all 3 of those teams are within a game of 500 or better. Now let's take a look at the UB Bulls schedule to close out the last 3 games. And for them, they go to Central Michigan next week, 2-6. Akron, they have at home, 1-8. And Kent State Golden Flashes, who beat this Ohio team a few weeks ago just to show you how crazy the MAC is and how things can change on a dime. But those three teams are all well below 500. They have a combined record of 6-20. That's right, 6-20 compared to the couple above 500 teams and bowl eligible teams that Ohio's going to have to deal with over the next couple weeks. And they only get one more game in the friendly confines of Peden Stadium. UB has two, and their last road game's coming up next week. So I think when you look at that schedule, yes, Ohio is going to be flying high, and they deserve to after this big victory. But I could easily see the Bobcats stubbing their toe over the final three games. Because remember, if UB wins out at 4-1 and Ohio loses even once, that would give the MAC East right back to the Bulls. We'll see you in Detroit. Because again, it's not overall record that matters. It is the Mid-American record, the conference record that does. So again, all Ohio needs to do is lose one of the last three, which I definitely think is possible, given the fact that they did lose to the Kent State Golden Flashes. And as long as UB takes care of their business, which they should do against all three of these opponents, I believe that you will be seeing the UB Bulls as MAC East champs and moving on to Detroit. And hey, they took down the top team in the MAC West, Toledo. So I would still say, UB fans, I know today was a rough one. Defense certainly didn't show up. Cole Snyder looked shaky at times, but I still think there is plenty of reason for optimism about this team's chances of winning the MAC this year. So for UB, another big thing in this game, though, one thing you had to keep an eye on, the turnovers. That's another thing. UB had really done a good job of playing disciplined, smart football over the course of their 5-game winning streak, and that evaporated tonight. Just too many costly mistakes. Snyder had a fumble, and not only that, a couple interceptions, and it really destroyed a couple of drives. If UB hangs on to the football, who knows? Maybe instead of 31-24, they take the lead. And then I think the thing you got to remember is how this game got away at the end. Ohio outscored UB 14-0 in the fourth quarter, but they were both in the blink of an eye, as Ohio in the fourth quarter had an offensive score, and then right on the heels of that, UB pinned back inside deep in their own territory, ended up turning the ball over again. Ohio gets it at around the UB 9, and they punch it in for another score. So within a blink of an eye, what was a 31-24 game became 45-24. And that is the type of thing that we were seeing from this team early in this season when they started 0-3. Not really what we expect to see from them during this 5-game winning streak that does come to an end in this 45-24 defeat. So there is going to be plenty to work on for the UB Bulls going into their last road game of the regular season next week at Central Michigan. Now it's that time again, as we always like to do here on Bullseye Nation, the podcast. We want to give you stats of the game, and we will do that right now. For Ohio, they had more first downs than the Bulls, 20-17. Third down efficiency, UB went 8 of 19 on third downs. Ohio, 4 of 9. And I think another telling stat in this game, yes, UB was good on fourth downs, 2 of 3. Ohio didn't even need to attempt a fourth down. And that's one of the things I was addressing earlier, is that it seemed like every time UB started to make a run, got it to within 7 a couple of times, the defense just was not able to get that big stop to keep the momentum in UB's favor. They let Ohio go right down the field and do what they wanted at will. So again, that's proof of it right there. The fact that Ohio didn't even need to attempt a fourth down conversion. Total yards in the game, 474 for the Bobcats, only 260 for your UB Bulls. Passing, 317 for Ohio, 238 through the air for the Bulls. Rushing, another dominant statistic for Ohio, 157 rushing yards, only 22 for the Bulls. Penalties, again, UB wasn't too bad in this regard. They still kept it pretty clean. Only 4 flags for 38 yards. Ohio had 7 penalties against them for 51 yards. But again, here's another issue. 3 turnovers in the game for UB, 2 for Ohio. And when you're playing in a game as important as this, if you lose the turnover battle, you're more likely than not to lose the game. And in this case, that's what happened to the Bulls. Time of possession, 30 minutes and 14 seconds for the Bobcats, 29 minutes and 46 seconds for your UB Bulls. However, there were still some very bright spots in this ballgame. It should be pointed out for UB. And so for the Bulls, there are some things they can take forward into their next games that they can be proud of from this one. And one of those we're going to bring to you right now. It is a game highlight, our defensive play of the game here on Bullseye Nation. 14-16 to go here in the third. 24-10. Ohio is our score. Bobcats going to set it up with 2 receivers either side of the line. Out of the pistol set, 4 down linemen for UB. Bobcats right to left down the field. From the Ohio 15-yard line, shotgun snap. Rourke back to pass. Looks, fires across the middle. Intercepted! Intercepted down the near sideline. Goes Cobb. He's at the 10. He is going to stroll on into the end zone. Touchdown, UB Bulls. A pick 6. What a huge play by Cobb as he jumped the route beautifully towards that near sideline. Took it all the way back for a 15-yard pick 6. And just like that, a game that Ohio led 24-3. All of a sudden, don't look now, but here come the Bulls stampeding again. They now have closed it to 24-16 early in the third. What a play by Cobb. And that was your defensive play of the game here on Bullseye Nation, the post-game podcast. And for UB, they do come away short 45-24, but it was worth noting that was a huge play. Again, down 24-3, UB did score a couple consecutive touchdowns. Got it back to 24-17. Then, from 31-17, they got it to 31-24. But, as we have alluded to, the defense just let UB down time and time again during this game. And so it ultimately ends with a frustrating 45-24 loss at the hands of the Ohio Bobcats. UB now has not won at Peden Stadium since 2009. And I spoke with our analyst, Norm Rodriguez, about that and a whole lot more in this interview segment on Bullseye Nation. Again, just going over a lot of different things, including the way the game played out and much more for UB as we head down the final weeks of the regular season. He's our analyst, and the good news is I'm proud to announce that he's going to be coming on pretty much every week from here for the rest of the football season. Love having him on. Always a pleasure. And even though it was a disappointing result tonight, Norm, first, thanks for coming on.
John, you know I got you, and you're not just a colleague, my brother, you're my friend.
Absolutely, and likewise here. Now, Norm, we're going to start with the game. Obviously not the result that we wanted tonight, falling 45-24 to the Ohio Bobcats, and that losing streak now continues. Have not won there since 2009. And I guess, Norm, the thing I'll start with is this defense. I mean, it had been playing so well over this 5-game winning streak. It just seemed to vanish tonight.
I got to agree. They gave up 474 yards of total offense, and they allowed Rourke to not only throw for over 300 yards, but they allowed him to go past his average of 301. He threw for 317 yards, almost 11 yards per pass attempt, and he had 5 touchdown passes. Numbers like that are straightly unacceptable. And speaking of UB, the running game fell apart on them. 22 yards on 28 carries, less than 1 yard per rush. I'm sorry, but that's pathetic.
I couldn't agree with you more. And actually, running was kind of where we were going to go next. But first, yeah, I mean, what did you see that Rourke may have been doing against this. I mean, you got to remember, this is the same UB defense that a week ago at UB Stadium shut down Daquan Finn, who I still think is the best quarterback in the MAC. And they really shut him down for the most part. It was a different story tonight against Rourke. What were you seeing that maybe Ohio came up with as sort of a blueprint against this UB defense tonight? Because, man, it sure worked for the Bobcats.
I believe it may have just been a case of sticking to the guns. Again, Rourke, he had another 300-yard performance. He completed nearly 70% of his passes, and the running game, it prevailed for them. They had 157 yards rushing, 4.5 yards per attempt, and Rourke had 45 rush yards as well, and he's the quarterback. When you allow a starting quarterback to rush for that much, you're in big trouble. But also, I got to give credit to Ohio's defense because they made Snyder throw the ball 49 times. He completed barely half of them with 25, 238 pass yards, and he had 2 touchdowns and 1 pick. So Snyder had some trouble versus those Bobcats.
Yes, he definitely did. And, Norm, I think another thing to keep in mind here, over this 5-game winning streak that UB had coming into this one, I think what we saw was basically they would jump out early. They would continue to put their foot on the throat of their opponent outside of the Toledo game where they had to come back. But every time they needed a big play, they seemed to get it. Every time they needed a clutch pass, they seemed to get it. And I think tonight we saw it, unfortunately, be a carbon copy, but this time on the other end, Ohio, getting out to that 17-0 lead after the first quarter. They got their crowd into it, and everything that UB does so well, I think tonight we saw Ohio just basically do. I mean, how weird was it kind of just seeing basically Ohio beat the Bulls at their own game, giving them a taste of their own medicine?
It was a bit strange. The Bulls have been on a 5-game winning streak prior to this loss, and they were unbeaten in their division. But in my personal opinion, it's not the end of the world for them. They can still win their division. They can still get a bowl appearance. They can still get to a good part of the playoffs, and the Bulls are more than capable of doing it.
Indeed. And again, I think this is something that, yes, this loss obviously hurts. This could have sealed the MAC East for the Bulls. Now, Ohio is kind of in the driver's seat. But, Norm, when you look at these 2 remaining schedules, as I said in my broadcast open, I still favor the Bulls to win the MAC East, even with this loss tonight, because even though they're both now 4-1 in the conference, I just think Ohio has a tougher sled from here on out. They have to play Ball State, which I think teams in the MAC West, I think the MAC West division is the stronger of the 2 divisions in the MAC conference. And I think Ball State is going to be desperate for their lives as they're 4-4 overall in the season. I think they could really surprise Ohio and upset them. Where for UB, I mean, they're playing Akron, whose season's been over for like 6 weeks. So even though they're both 4-1, and yes, this was a disappointing result, I myself still kind of give UB the edge in the division. I would still say that they're maybe the favorite, even though Ohio now has that debt. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Honestly, John, I couldn't have agreed any more because these next 3 teams they play, Central Michigan, Akron, and Kent State, their combined record is, from what I'm looking at here, it's 6-20. Central Michigan's 2-6, Akron's 1-8, and Kent State's 3-6. So there's no reason why the Bulls cannot win out and finish the season on a strong note.
And, you make a good point, though, Norm, when you said as far as, we were kind of talking about this during the game. As far as the bowl eligibility, I mean, UB's still right on the door of that. They only need 1 more win. They win out. They would end up at 8 wins overall in the season. I would think at the very least that would be enough to get them a bowl game.
Well, it has to be because, again, unless you got sanctioned for God knows what, 6 wins, you're eligible for a bowl. And the UB Bulls, no pun intended, they've become a relevant football team the last several years, and they have more than earned a spot for a bowl game.
And, Norm, the one thing is, and we heard Brad Ryder talk about it last week, and he said it quite a bit. We just cannot win in Athens. You have to go all the way back to 2009 to see the last time that was the case. Now, Norm, again, between all the play-by-play you do for high school teams with WNY Athletics and all the teams that you've covered as far as play-by-play wise, yes, the rosters are different from year to year. Players are different. But do you think that the fact that UB has not won at Peden Stadium now since 2009, do you think that may have been in the players' heads and maybe played a factor in tonight's game?
I think it may have spooked UB from what I watched. I didn't catch all the game, but I watched a lot of the second half. And as a team, they looked really uncomfortable. And even, for example, that one pitch that resulted in a touchdown that made it 38-24, it looked like UB was starting to come back. They were down 17-0 and 24-3, I believe, at one point, but they were able to cut it down to 7 points. But I got to give Ohio credit again because they knew the way to respond. And if they wouldn't have counterattacked, we could have seen another UB comeback.
And quite frankly, that's where I think a lot of us listening here in Buffalo, I think when that pick six by Cobb happened to make it 24-17, we started thinking, okay, we saw this with Toledo. Just go out, make that big stop, give us a chance. Unfortunately, though, this defense was not able to make that stop. If they stop them at 24-17, you're right, Norm. This post-game tone could certainly be very different. But the fact that the defense just could not let that happen, they just could not get the big stops when they needed it. As an offensive player, you played football in high school. I mean, as an offensive player, when you're trying to climb back into the game, and each time you score, you keep watching your defense let the other team go down the field smooth as butter. I mean, how demoralizing can that be if you're an offensive player there in the huddle?
Like, that can be very frustrating. And it's that case when it comes to sports of if it's not broke, don't fix it. Keep running what you're running until your opponent finds a way to stop it.
Absolutely. And I think another part you mentioned as far as the running game, it's funny, and we'll get into the Bills a little bit later on, but you kind of saw how the Bills defense got gashed a little bit with the running game. Totally the case tonight for the UB Bulls against Ohio. I mean, that running game for the Bobcats, everyone makes a big deal about Rourke, and they should. He had a couple touchdowns in the first half. He really got them rolling on the right track. But that running game, Norm, I mean, that for some reason, UB Bulls tonight just didn't have an answer for that.
No, they didn't. And a lot of the case was the numbers for Snyder, because when you get sacked in college football, it's considered a rush attempt. And from looking at the numbers, 16 carries for -9 yards on his end, but that wasn't entirely his fault. It looked like they just were uncomfortable, and Snyder did the best he could. He just wasn't able to come up with the results that the Bobcats were able to execute.
Now, I will say, in the first half, Snyder did look a little shaky, not just because of the pressure, as you just mentioned, on the defensive end, but Snyder did miss a couple wide open receivers early. And, we really haven't seen that a lot from Snyder, except for the first 3 weeks of the season where they started 0-3. He usually is so good at making those reads down the field. But tonight, especially in the first half, I don't know. It just kind of seemed like he was off. He missed some receivers that were wide open. Did you notice that?
Yeah, I did. There were some throws that were underthrown. There were some that were overthrown. But in all fairness, there were a few passes I saw where the receivers should have had full control. There was even one where late in the game, his intended receiver caught the ball, then he coughed it up, and the Ohio defense picked it up and got a good 30, 35-yard return off it.
I think, Norm, that's exactly where we got to go next. The other thing that we have talked about and we have mentioned on these past post-game shows, what a good job that UB did in terms of protecting the football. In their win against Toledo, they forced Toledo into 6 turnovers and only had 1 themselves. Well, unfortunately, tonight, that script flipped as well. The turnovers, Norm, especially a couple of them on those long drives. absolute killers, I believe, to the UB Bulls offense tonight.
Yeah, and going into that game, they were ranked 10th in the entire FBS with 17 takeaways, and their turnover margin was a +7, which are both very impressive. But you and I both know that plus the minus, that's going to probably go down a small hair after this game tonight.
Absolutely. Honestly, I think that it's going to go down by more than a hair tonight after this one. I mean, this was a pretty ugly performance. And had Ohio, it's amazing because it's not like Ohio played totally clean either. They had a couple fumbles. They gave up the pick six. So certainly not one that I think is going to be a masterpiece that either team's going to put in the time capsule. It's just that Ohio, when they really needed to, and I think this was pivotal, was in the fourth quarter when it was still a one-score game. Ohio got the touchdown, but we've seen UB have big fourth quarters. But then what did UB do? Gave it away again, and all of a sudden Ohio, in a blink of an eye, had 2 touchdowns, and what was a 31-24 score became 45-24, and at that point, good night the lights.
Yeah, and it's only a month away from Christmas, but the way that was looking, you might as well put the Santa Claus hat over the Bulls logo because it was definitely giving season.
And there we go, folks. We get our first normism of the program. Love it.
Yeah, I know how much you're into them.
I think a lot of people are into them, my good friend. But unfortunately for UB, this is they were undefeated. They were undefeated in the conference, and now that they lost this game to Ohio, I mean, if I would have told you before the season began that UB would be 4-0 going into that 5th MAC game, and even though they lost, they're still 4-1. You'd be pretty happy with that, I would think, especially given the way the season started. But it kind of doesn't feel like that tonight, given how big a game this was.
Yeah, indeed. But again, the good thing is they're playing 3 teams that are on the mediocre end of the spectrum. And the game against Akron, that's going to be live. That's on the CBS Sports Network. That's on November 19th at 3:30. And from what I'm seeing, the game against Kent State, the kickoff time, that's to be determined.
And I think when we go back as we continue to look at the tape, Coach Lindquist, I'm sure something that Coach Mo is going to want to address is not only the turnovers, but also just what happened with the defense. I think that is going to be a big key he looks at. But you got to be able to turn the page here, Norm, and get ready for those games. As far as the head coach, if you're Coach Mo, Norm, what are you telling your guys after this one to try and get them fired up for the last 3 games they have ahead?
I would just say it's too early to panic. Losses are going to happen even to the best teams. You're going to have your ups and downs. Nothing is perfect. You just got to take the next game and act like your record's 0-0.
Yeah, and I think another thing that we're going to have to factor in here is that, we saw it's one of the things, Paul Hamilton talks about, like with the Buffalo Sabres. Sometimes your best players have to be your best players, especially in big games. And unfortunately, I have to say tonight that I would say Rourke and Ohio's best players outperformed the UB Bulls' best players tonight on the field, and it showed on the scoreboard. And overall, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would. Personally, I couldn't have said it any better. And again, the good thing is they just got to carry it on the next week. One more win is a bowl appearance, but I know they don't just want 6 wins. They want to win out these 3 games and go 8-4. That's a respectable record.
And not only that, if Ohio ends up slipping up, all of a sudden you're right back in first place again. I know you want to have control of your own destiny. And yes, this pushes UB down a little bit in terms of the MAC hierarchy. But hey, Ohio only has to cough it up once. And we know this UB Bulls team is opportunistic enough and hot enough. They can still go on another run here to finish the year.
Oh, yeah. Even though the season's winding down to a close, there's still a lot of football left. It's not over till they get to the whatever team gets to the BCS championship game.
Absolutely. Well said. We are going to talk about the Bills deadline moves here. Just one more thing. Obviously they got Central Michigan coming up. Now that's a team that you would figure UB could be. And that's one of the frustrating things when you see the fact that Kent State, who I don't think is that great, they actually beat Ohio. It just kind of shows you the up and down nature of this conference. But we got Central Michigan coming up next. Final road game of the season. I think it's going to be very important. Don't keep putting yourselves in these holes. The last 2 weeks, they have trailed by more than double digits. And Norm, I got to tell you why. You give them credit for pulling it out against Toledo and almost doing the same until the fourth quarter when the wheels fell off against the Bobcats. I got to imagine it's not a recipe for continued success. And I'm sure Coach Mo is going to be addressing that with his players heading into that game against the Chippewas.
Yeah, the number one thing when it comes to not just sports but in life is you got to have a short memory with the shortcomings in life. Even before the games against Toledo and Ohio, there are other 2 games prior to that, though it's obviously old news. When they played Bowling Green and UMass, the differential, they outscored both opponents 72-14. So you and I both know they're capable to not just win a close game, but also run away with it and put the foot on the Adam's apple.
And I think that that's going to be especially important just to rub and erase away the bad taste from this game. Okay, Norm. So obviously, as we know, today was the NFL trade deadline. I know this is a UB Bulls podcast, but again, we are one Buffalo. Obviously you get Hines from the Colts, and then you also bring back Dean Marlowe from the Atlanta Falcons. And it's funny, Norm, when I sort of mentioned it, it almost seemed like you were more excited about the trade for Marlowe. What do you think about the moves that Brandon Beane was able to pull off today?
Well, with you talking about the Marlowe, I was very happy with that because he used to be a Buffalo Bill, but sometimes when that cap gets too tight, you got to let some of your guys go, and bringing him back, that's going to fill the void because he is an experienced safety. Hides out, obviously, for the rest of the year with a neck injury. Poyer aggravated his elbow against Green Bay. So I think it's a great move. Only cost them a 7th-round draft pick, so not huge stock capital on that. And regarding Nyheim Hines, very happy with that result. He is not known to carry the ball a lot, but he's a great pass receiving back. He could be a great safety valve receiver for Josh Allen. And if they wanted to use him for it, he's also experienced as a punt returner. He has 2 return touchdowns from them to his credit.
And I think especially not only with the Dolphins adding Chubb, but once you saw that Tony got traded from the Giants to the Chiefs, I mean, you had to figure, especially with Zach Moss never really seeming to get it going. To me, and Norm, you made this point earlier, and I would agree with this, that Moss is much more of a fullback. He's like a battering ram more than the burst of speed type running back that they need. I think this makes up for J.D. McKissick. I think this makes up for what their open James Cook was going to be. The way I look at this, it's an arms race, and I totally agree with that. I think you had to load up knowing the teams you're going to have to be facing if the Bills ultimately end up where they want to go.
Yeah, and right now they're in first place. They're 6-1 in the season. They've got a big divisional matchup this coming week. They're on the road at MetLife taking on the Jets. And these divisional games are very important. And even though the Jets are 5-3, I am not convinced. I think they're going to fall apart like a house of cards when they start playing teams like Buffalo.
I think you have to be worried about Wilson. If you're a Jets fan, he has not looked good at all. And now we've even heard rumblings, maybe Joe Flacco get a step. But regardless, the Jets, you got to give them credit. Their defense looks awesome with Sauce Gardner and certain other players on that defense. But I think the fact that they lost Breece Hall for the rest of the year, I mean, we're fans of the game, just like we're fans of Buffalo. I mean, what a shame for the Jets, especially the way he was going, such a promising young player. But losing that heart of that offense, I think it's going to be a very tough task for the Jets against the Bills, especially because Coach McDermott is giving it to the Bills for the way they played in that second half against Green Bay. They won, but they only scored 3 points, Norm.
Yeah, and there was a couple of those drives in the fourth quarter where they got too greedy. They should have been running the ball, milking
That's
the
a good
clock,
point.
but Allen threw 2 interceptions, and one of them was to Jair Alexander. Yeah, even though he had the pick, the trash talk came back to bite him because Diggs had over 100 yards and a touchdown.
Hey, you know what? Sometimes the best answer to somebody jawing off at you, let the play on the field do the talking. And Stephon certainly did that. And for the Bills, I mean, they're 6-1. They made that big trade, and I mean, they're sitting pretty good right now.
Yeah, they are. And Dolphin fans also can say their stuff all they want. Yeah, they beat Buffalo, but they're in third place right now, so they can just zip the lip.
I would agree with that. It's not only that, I would say that, as far as the Dolphins go, they're more inconsistent. Think about this. They beat the Buffalo Bills, so right now they have the head-to-head tiebreaker, but they couldn't hold first place for more than a week. And within 3 weeks, Buffalo now has more than a game lead over them. So, you know what? Ouch.
Yeah, and even though Tagovailoa has been quote unquote playing well, I still believe in the philosophy of him to turn the ball over.
That's nice. See, this is Norm the wordsmith, ladies and gentlemen. He's like I said, he's the coolest play-by-play announcer in the South Towns. He is the voice of Jamestown, and I mean, really excited to have you on for the rest of the season for UB. The good news is you only got one more road game left and then 2 home games to close it out. And the Bills look like they're marching to the number 1 seed. Pretty exciting time to be a football fan here in Western New York.
Oh, yeah. And it's all, like you said, the beginning of a 27-day stretch of football. And personally, I think the Bills are going to do all right. And the big thing is, come this game, Tre'Davious White is back.
Absolutely. Everybody going to love that. And last thing here, everybody, I've seen it a lot on social media. I've kind of tried to stay away from it, but I've seen it so much that I kind of want to get your take on it. Everybody's saying how Buffalo is the only New York team, and then you got the Giants and Jets, but they play over in Jersey. So, Norm, where do you? I kind of fall on it that it really doesn't matter. I don't see what the whole upside excitement over this conversation is all about. Well, where do you stand on that?
Well, I don't get too crazy about it, but I do believe because the Jets and Giants, they've been playing in New Jersey since 1960, or the Jets have been since 60, and the Giants have been around since the 30s. So, in my view, Buffalo's the only New York team, but the Giants and Jets, New Jersey, that's only where they're at. It's only roughly an hour away from New York City. So I could see why some people think they're all New York.
Yeah, I think it's more because obviously if New York City wasn't right there, Jersey probably wouldn't have teams. So that's kind of why I think that comes in. So, hey Norm, before we let you go here, what do you got coming up on your show over in Jamestown? You want to give our listeners and viewers a little bit of a preview of what's to come?
Yeah, I'll just be doing a simple recap of the game against Green Bay and then the trades that Buffalo reeled in before the 4:00 deadline on Tuesday, and also the second round of high school football playoffs as well, among others.
And you know what, there's going to be a good Chuck Funk Bowl coming up in Amherst, and Amherst against Starpoint, and then obviously the high school playoffs right around the corner as well. Going to be very exciting. We know WNY Athletics is going to have you covered, and we know our good friend Norm is certainly going to have you covered as he's going to continue doing the Jamestown. At least we know for this Friday. And like I said, he's the voice of Jamestown, coolest dude, and really always a blast to have him on. Norm, good stuff. Thank you so much. And hopefully next week we'll be talking about a win against Central Michigan. Let's stop talking about the losses.
Right. At the end of the day, losses are going to happen, but they got to look to next week because, again, Central Michigan, not one of the hottest dishes on the poo-poo platter, so it should be a W for the UB, but they got to take it seriously because any given ball game, a team can wake up and pull out a W.
Indeed, that's why it's Maction, baby. That's why it's Maction. But on that note, I think that's a good place to wrap it up. Norm, outstanding stuff as always. Thanks for coming on, and we will talk to you next week. Go Bulls. Hope they beat Central Michigan.
Go Bulls.
Absolutely. Norm, we'll talk to you again next week.
All right, sounds good.
Poo-poo platter. I mean, Norm, you are one of a kind, my friend. You really are. So we hope you enjoyed that interview segment here on Bullseye Nation. And I mean, when it's Norm Rodriguez, how can you not? Especially when he gives you gems like that. But for the UB Bulls, again, Norm pretty much hit the nail right on the head. This just was not good enough today, especially on the defensive side of the football. And there is going to be a lot for the Bulls to clean up for Coach Lindquist and company heading into their game against Central Michigan next week. So now that we have an opportunity, before we take a look around the MAC scoreboard, we want to give you our offensive plays of the game. And these were the 2 touchdowns that allowed UB to at least stay in the game until the fourth quarter. "25 seconds to go here, first half action. Ohio 24, UB 3, second down and 10. They're going to go with 2 receivers spread out to the right, 2 flanking off to the left. Snyder out of the pistol set, running back Washington off his left shoulder. 3 down linemen for the Bobcats. UB driving down the field right to left, north to south end zone. Ball placed middle of the field at the Ohio 15. Snyder taking the snap. 3-step drop, pumps, airs it out, far right corner of the end zone, and it is brought in. Meanwhile, a flag comes down, but Justin Marshall wins the one-on-one to the back right corner of the end zone. It's a touchdown right before half for the UB Bulls. He's got the ball, got both feet in. Again, a flag came in, but all indications are it's against Ohio. What a job by Justin Marshall. Beautifully placed throw by Cole Snyder, an absolute dime. And that is a huge score before halftime. Boy, did UB need that with 14 seconds to play in the first half. Ohio 24, UB 9. What a passing play. 1:54 to go here in the third. UB knocking on the door, 4th and goal. Really need a touchdown as they're going to go for it here. Our score right now currently 31-17 Ohio. UB from left to right, minute 14 to go in the third. Snyder again out of the shotgun, but this time empty backfield. 2 receivers to the left, 2 to the right. 4 on the line for the Bobcats. UB left to right down the field. The snap, Snyder rolling to his left, looking, he still has it. Blitz is coming, he's at the Ohio 5, flips it over the middle. Look at this, he's got Washington, takes it to the goal line and gets across into the end zone. Touchdown Bulls. Boy, that was a little Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen like right there. Snyder had 3 Bobcats chasing him on his tail to the left side from around the 5-yard line, got to the line of scrimmage, and then he basically just flicked it right over the middle. Washington had it. He took on 2 defenders at the goal line, but got across, and UB converts on a huge 4th and goal. So we've got a ball game, folks. A minute 10 to go in the third quarter. It is now Ohio 31, UB 23. We got a ball game, folks, here in Athens. Those are your offensive plays of the game. And so now, before we sign off here, we do want to give you a look quickly around the MAC and the MAC scoreboard. And because it's MACtion, we see quite a few games broken up. So we only have one other score to tell you about. and that's Ball State beating Kent State 27-20. And all of a sudden, Ball State's starting to look a lot more competitive as they have won a couple games here and now are 5-4 on the season. And that's what I mean about Ohio not having, they can't punch their ticket to the Motor City just yet because they got to play a team like Ball State in a couple weeks at Ball State. So Ohio still has tough sledding to do, while UB is pretty easy straight ahead. But today it was Ball State prevailing over Kent State 27-20. Central Michigan, UB's next opponent, will be taking on Northern Illinois in DeKalb, Illinois on the road. That'll be tomorrow at 7 o'clock. And Bowling Green and Western Michigan in an ESPN2 game will also be tomorrow at 7 o'clock. And that'll be from Bowling Green. Ohio placed UB1 earlier this season. So that is a look around the MAC scoreboard. And that is pretty much going to wrap things up here. And before we wrap things up, we do want to give you a quick preview of the next game, and it's going to be at Central Michigan. Kelly Short Stadium is the venue as UB gets set to take on the Central Michigan Chippewas. Now, for Central Michigan, it has not been pretty for them this season. For Central Michigan, it has been a grind all season long. Their only wins coming against Bucknell 41-0, an FCS team. And then they took on who I think is probably the worst team in the MAC, the Akron Zips, and they could only beat them by a touchdown. That should really tell you just how much of a struggle it's been. And, you know, the amazing thing is, and boy, was I wrong about the Chippewas. You know, sometimes, you know, as much as we like to think we're perfect, we're not. And right here, I got to admit, after Central Michigan went to Oklahoma State, who's still 12th ranked in the country, and put up 44 points against that defense, you know, I thought Central Michigan was going to be a factor. They have not been. They followed it up with a 38-24 loss against South Alabama. Then they went to Penn State and really weren't competitive, losing 33-14. And then they did lose a couple close games, one to Ball State, and then falling to Toledo. But the wheels have come off for them this season. And quite frankly, for the UB Bulls, if you can't beat a team like this, you probably don't deserve to be bowl eligible. So I would look for UB next week in Central Michigan, last road game of the year, to bounce back from the bitter taste they're feeling tonight, get their season back on track, and oh yeah, overtake Ohio again for the top spot in the MAC East. So that'll be a 7 o'clock kickoff. It's going to be next Wednesday night. Once again, it's a MACtion game, so it will be on ESPN2 and also along the flagship station for the UB Bulls, WWKB 1520 AM, The Bet. And on that note, that is going to finish things up here on this edition of Bullseye Nation, the UB Bulls football podcast. I am John Garuba. Thank you for tuning in one more time. Unfortunately, it was the bad guys prevailing tonight. It was the Ohio Bobcats 45 and the UB Bulls 24. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you again next week after the Central Michigan game, everybody. Until then, have yourself a great rest of your weekend, great rest of the week, and as always, go UB Bulls go. We'll see you next time, everybody.